This is Kevin Ward. I'm the program director of the Sports Animal Radio Network in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and ESPN Tulsa. I'm also a deacon at the Park Church of Christ and serve over the sports ministry. And this is Suit Up. Well, she's recognized as one of the most influential women in sports business, having represented more professional athletes than any woman in the industry, having served as agent or contract advisor to players in every NFL draft since 2006, as well as numerous athletes in the Major League Baseball draft and the Olympics. In 2010, she made history as the first woman to represent a top 5 pick in the NFL draft, and her story of progress through pain was featured as part of Motrin's National Women in Progress campaign just a couple of years ago. She was also Miss Oklahoma in 1997, but for all of her accomplishments, there was a time when Kelli Masters felt alone and not good enough until she reached out to God in a way she had never done before. I'll talk with this inspiring woman after this.
This is Mitch Wilburn, preaching minister at the Park Church of Christ, proud sponsor of Suit Up. I'd like to extend an invitation to you to join us for worship at the park. We're a Bible-based church that loves the Lord and loves people. We have one service on Sunday morning at 9 a.m., and that's followed by classes for everyone, from newborn to 100 years of age. The park sits on a rather large lot near the corner of Garnett and the Creek Turnpike and offers a Sunday evening service at 6 p.m., and Wednesday night we meet at 7 p.m. Our youth have their own building with multiple men and women leading them, and our kids, age 1 to 5th grade, have their own educational wing that even has its own working carousel and ice cream parlor. And I love both. Kevin, the host of this podcast, is in charge of our sports ministry that goes on all year round with basketball, volleyball, softball, great activities. So come see us at the park on the corner of Garnett and the Creek Turnpike, or check us out on the web at parkplaza.org.
Let's start first off with what you're doing right now, and then we'll backpedal a little bit and go into, when you were raised in Midwest City and some of your childhood. But I know when we talked a minute ago off air here that you are in Washington, D.C. You've got players there that you need to visit. There are other things that you're doing as well for company. But you mentioned when I said, are you there for fun? And you said, well, don't get to do a lot of traveling for fun much anymore. That fun is actually at home.
Being at home, yes. Most definitely. It's funny how the first few years of having a grown-up job, I was working towards becoming a partner in a law firm. And I remember during those long days kind of looking out the window occasionally and thinking, I wonder what it's like to actually leave town. I'm always here. I never get to travel. And now it's just the opposite. I think, if I could just have a week where I don't have to go anywhere, that would be wonderful. So it's funny what you appreciate. But I really do enjoy the opportunities that my job allows me to have now, and to see the country and even the world and work with some pretty amazing people. So I'm very, very blessed, and I don't take even the work trips I don't take for granted.
I read an interesting article from USA Today from last year, in fact, from April of 2018. Lindsey Jones wrote the article, Female NFL Agents Changing the Landscape, and I thought the number was pretty overwhelming that currently, now this was last year, so maybe that number has grown a little bit, but her statistic was that only 5% of the 830 certified agents are women, and obviously you are one of them. How has that number changed in the last year?
Interestingly, the number has actually decreased. And I think some people, there have been arguments made by people in the business that, it's getting harder, it's getting worse for women. And I really don't think that's the case. When I first became a sports agent, particularly working with NFL players, I was one of just a handful. I think there were maybe 2 or 3 of us that were even certified, much less representing actual players in the league. And it has grown substantially since then. Every year there's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of fluctuation just in who's in the business and who's getting out and who's coming in. And so I don't think year over year, I think you're going to have to look at a much longer period of time to see any really significant trends. I do know this. There are far more women in the business now doing what I do than when I started. There are women that are representing higher draft picks, starters in the league, and not just, for a while I think there were women that represented kickers and punters and just specialists, and that was it. But now you're seeing women really having great influence with some of the top players in the league. And so you're seeing, I don't think that it's getting harder for women. It's certainly, for me, when I used to go into meetings with potential clients and their families or with general managers, I would get the strangest looks. And I would say, they would ask, well, where's the agent? And I would say, well, I'm the agent. And I don't get that as much anymore. It still happens. But now I think there's not as much pushback, and there's not as much, I think, prejudgment about whether or not a woman can negotiate a contract with an NFL team and represent a player in the NFL draft. There's just, that question has been taken off the table. And I'm so thankful for that. I wouldn't say that I got into the business to be a pioneer or a trailblazer. That wasn't my intention. I didn't want to be the first to do something. I found what I believed God had called me to do with my life. And the fact that I was a woman didn't really play, any part of that. It was just, I found what I knew in my heart and in my spirit I was supposed to be doing with my life. And it just so happened to kind of have that impact that now other women are seeing that as something that God may call them to too, and that they can excel at. And so I'm thankful to see some of those sort of gender barriers coming down, and women having great success and great influence in kind of untraditional ways.
I know one of the reasons why I made the call to you was you and I are Facebook friends, and I saw a post recently because you just mentioned that while you don't get it as often, there are still times when coaches will say things that make you shudder, and that happened not too long ago.
Yeah.
Exactly that, when a coach responded with you being the player's agent, that I didn't know he had a girl for an agent, and I'm sure that just ran all through you.
Fortunately, I think I've been through enough of those conversations, and I'm in my mid-40s. I've been doing this for 15 years. Very few things surprise me anymore. They really just make me laugh. And I remember, instead of getting all offended, which I would have, 10 years ago, I just kind of laughed, like, oh, bless his heart. Like, he's still, let's bring him to, the modern times where women can actually do things like negotiate contracts. It's amazing. And so for me, it was more of like, okay, let's let him know that women can talk about football too, and women can understand what's going on in sports business and in any business at any level. And so to me, it was actually kind of funny.
Well, you have represented more professional athletes than any woman in the industry, having served as agent or contract advisor to players in every NFL draft since 2006, as well as numerous athletes in Major League Baseball and the Olympics. Can you, and folks probably won't know this until we tell them, but one of the subjects of one of my other podcasts, Tress Way, punter for the Washington Redskins, is one of your clients. Can you tell us some of the other NFL players and maybe some of those in Major League Baseball and the Olympics?
You bet. So football-wise, my first big kind of breakout client was Gerald McCoy. He was number 3 overall in 2010 for the Buccaneers. And then I've represented actually a lot of Oklahoma players and Oklahoma State players over the years. Right now, one of my most recognizable players, Tress Way is practically the MVP of the Redskins right now as a punter. So he's obviously done well. He's in year 6, which is so hard to believe. And then Blake Jarwin, who played at Oklahoma State University and now is a tight end for the Dallas Cowboys. Would have been the starting tight end if not for a little, unretirement ceremony in the off season with Witten coming back. But Blake has taken it all in stride. He continues to get to be around and learn from one of the best to ever play the position, and is taking full advantage of that, and is really stepping up and doing quite well in his own right. And then kind of some up-and-comers in the league. David Moore is a receiver with the Seahawks, and he is coming off of an injury but looks to have a pretty significant breakout year, especially with Doug Baldwin no longer being or having retired from Seattle. So, that's just a handful. I have 8 players that are active roster in the NFL right now. I have a handful of free agents that I expect to be signing here over the next few weeks, and so I've got quite a group of NFL players. And it's just I own my agency. We have a great staff. We have a baseball division. We have Olympians that we work with, but I am the football agent, and so to have to be handling everything for all of those players is a huge responsibility, and one I love and take seriously. We have a number of players that have been drafted in the Major League Baseball draft. They're all in the minor leagues right now, so hopefully our baseball division is fairly new, so hopefully we'll see some of those guys getting called up over the next few years. Baseball is a long process, as you know. And then in the Olympics, I've represented Winter Olympians, Summer Olympians. I represented Asia Evans, who's an Olympic bobsledder and bronze medalist, both in Sochi and in Pyeongchang last year. And represented an Olympic hockey player, Gigi Marvin. And, it's been a lot of fun. Gymnasts and weightlifters, and I actually got my start handling appearances and endorsements for Olympic athletes from Oklahoma, and one thing led to another. And so that's kind of part of my story becoming an agent. Although my focus is football, we have branched out into other sports, which has been so much fun.
So how many miles do you log a year in travel?
I just know that I'm whatever the super duper status is for Southwest Airlines, I'm there. That has definitely been my transportation of choice. Although I'm known to jump in my car and just drive to places like Atlanta and Nashville, and of course Dallas and Houston. But I travel. Goodness, I think easily 50 or 60 trips a year, if not more.
Wow. I picked up early in this conversation when you were talking about becoming an agent and following where the Spirit was directing you. And obviously that's part of the reason for having you on this podcast, is to talk about your faith and how it has developed over the years. And I know you grew up in Midwest City. I guess you were somewhere in the early 90s graduate from Midwest City High School?
Yes, 1991, Bomber graduate.
So,
and, very proud of my Bomber roots.
So, were you born in Midwest City?
I was actually born in Oklahoma City. My dad had been in the Air Force, so he was stationed at Tinker, and went to OCU Law School. My mom was a teacher in Midwest City, taught second grade. And so I started out early in life, Oklahoma City, Midwest City. We moved back for a number of years to Tahlequah, which is where the Masters family is from, and then moved back to Midwest City right around 4th grade. And so most of my, childhood and all the way through high school was spent in Midwest City. And I obviously was very focused at that time. Most people still know me as one of the twin twirlers. I was a baton twirler from the time I was 5 years old and competed nationally and internationally for years. And, of course, my dream was to become the twirler at OU. And so my twin sister and I were the twirlers for Midwest City High School, and then went on to become the featured twirlers at OU from 91 to 94. So that was quite the dream come true for both of us. And still to this day, anywhere I go in Oklahoma, I'm usually remembered as one of the twirlers.
Well, listen, that's pretty cool to be known for that.
There could be worse things. Yeah, there could be worse things to be known for.
Absolutely. You could have also, been known for being Miss Oklahoma in 1997. Yeah. And now you got the female agent thing going as well. So I think you got a lot going for you. I want to go back to 1997 because you had mentioned to me in an email that while you did grow up in a Christian home, you didn't really have a real personal relationship with Christ until 1997, which is interesting because that is also the year that you were crowned Miss Oklahoma after being Miss Oklahoma City University. So how did the two of those cross paths?
Well, it was, I had like you said, grown up in a Christian home. We went to church, but to me, it was never. I would hear people talk about personal relationships, and it was just something that always felt like it wasn't. It wasn't something that was necessarily, an important part of my daily life. I didn't know how to get there. In fact, I remember thinking that I just wasn't one of the special ones. It just wasn't available to me. I wasn't special enough or good enough, and I always wondered, even though, I went to church and I tried to be a good person, there was just a disconnect and there was a lot of emptiness. I grew up in a lot of fear, and I don't think that's anyone else's fault. I think I was in so much fear of failure, of letting people down. I was very much a people pleaser and an achiever, very, very high driven achiever. But, looking back, I see that all of it was really fear-based. It was just this constant fear of not being enough and not being good enough and not being liked by everybody. And I think, all of us maybe still struggle with that to a certain degree of being caught up in the opinions of others. And that just my entire value, self-worth and value is tied up in achievement and in not letting anyone down, looking perfect, all of those things. And that really that's just the place of God in my life. I was trying to fill up the void in my soul with applause and with attention and relationships, getting into relationships and all of the things that the world seemed to have to offer. And yet the more I achieved and the more, applause and the more people liked me, the more empty I felt on the inside. And I reached a point where I had realized all of my goals. I had checked off one at a time all of my lifelong goals. I found myself with this great resume and this great, list of accomplishments, but absolutely no sense of self-worth and just so empty. And at the same time, so afraid that, people would, at some point, everything would come crashing down and people would realize that I really wasn't that great and I wasn't smart and I wasn't pretty and I wasn't any of the things that I felt like I'd pretended to be my whole life. And I just reached that point where I was just tired. I was miserable. I was empty. Nothing that I was trying to achieve was filling up the need in my soul. And I do remember at one point I was in law school, and I had been so busy my whole life. I started being busy when I was 7 years old. I remember carrying a planner when I was 7 because I had so many activities and so many practices and games. And I had been so busy that I finally actually slowed down when I got to law school because all I had time for was law school. And so I had during law school, I had sought out ways to find scholarship money, and that led me to doing a Miss Oklahoma preliminary pageant. And it was in those moments when I was focusing on law school and getting ready for the pageant that really I finally came to this place where I was again, like I mentioned, I was just tired. I was tired of trying to perform and be on stage all the time and still being so empty, even with all the attention and all the accomplishments. It's miserable. And I reached that point where I remember just looking up at the sky and going, God, I need to know if you're real. I need to know if there's more to this. I need to know that there's more to life than just trying to be a good person, going to church and trying to, look perfect. I need to know if there's more. And I remember just crying out to him. And I remember a specific evening when I walked into my apartment and just crashed to my knees and said, I cannot take another step unless I know God is real and I know that I am, that I have meaning, that my life has meaning beyond what I've experienced so far. I just wanted to know that there was more to life. And I wanted to know that the God I read about, that in the Bible, he talked to people and he touched people, he healed people, and he was so real. And I wanted to know that he was real and that I could truly connect with that. And in that moment, when I just cried out, I didn't even know exactly how to pray, but I just said, God, I want you to be real to me. I want to know you. And it's amazing that when you cry out, he shows up. Mm-hmm. And he filled my heart, I think for the first time, with love that I had never felt before. And I'm going on, but from that moment forward, I was so filled with a desire to pour out my love to him and find out what he wanted me to do with my life and just do that and just please him. That changed everything for me. And it was a moment when I know I gave my life fully to him. Not that I became perfect at all. Life became even harder, but I had purpose, and I knew that God loved me and that I had finally connected and found that one relationship and that one thing that was going to fill up my soul.
Do you find yourself at times, or have you found since then, kind of slipping back maybe to that dark place? And if you do, what do you do to make sure you don't plunge any further? It's
funny because God has, I think he does this for all of us. He kind of gives us those moments in our lives, those benchmarks that keep us anchored. And to me, it really is pressing in and going, God, I want to know I can hear your voice. And then knowing that I could, not that he was going to boom out in an audible voice, but in my heart. And as I read the word, I knew I could tap into hearing him tell me, you're my child. I love you. I have a hope and a future for you. I knew I could hear his voice, and I go back. My soul is anchored in that moment when I realized, I believe it was revelation to me that God revealed his voice and his heart to me, and I go back to that moment all the time. And so if I start to drift into a place where I'm frustrated by circumstances, or I'm frustrated with things not happening the way that I think they should be, or I'm trying to make something happen and it's not working, I go back to, am I doing this in my own, with my own understanding? Am I doing this? Am I trying to make things happen? Am I focused on my circumstances, or am I focused on who God is and what he's doing in me? And if I shift my focus back in that moment to not looking at my circumstances, but looking at Jesus and looking at the Word and looking at, okay, God, what is your will in this situation, and what do you say about me and my life? Not what the circumstances look like, but what does God say? I can always kind of go back to that anchor of true faith, and faith comes from hearing, and hearing from the Word of God. And when we get in the Word of God and we spend time with him, we hear him. And that's what, to me, I can't imagine going through life. And, I remember what life was like before I knew I could tap in and connect with God and hear his voice in my heart. I remember that life, and I never want to go back there. And if I find myself drifting back to that, I course correct very quickly. Say, okay, I'm going to get back in the Word. I'm going to get back in prayer and really seeking out, what does God want in this situation? What does God want from me? And that is always the answer. God always is the solution. He's not the problem.
Well, it sounds like you're living out Romans 12:1, that you're presenting yourself as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, and to realize, Kelli, that you have, that none of this is possible without him, and that you're constantly giving him the glory for all of your accomplishments is awesome. And I hope that that's a lesson that a lot of our listeners to this podcast will get out of this, and I certainly will take it as a lesson for me. And speaking of lessons, I know amongst a lot of the things that you do, you also serve as an adjunct professor at Oklahoma City University, and also at my alma mater at Oklahoma Christian University. Yeah, teaching sports law?
I do. I teach sports law and just love it. We never run out of things to talk about. So it's been a lot of fun. Really, it's funny. I grew up wanting to be, my mom was a teacher, my dad was a lawyer. I wanted to be a lawyer and a teacher, which I found out I couldn't do, but I couldn't do both. But now I kind of do. I am a lawyer and I am a teacher. So it's funny how God takes even the little dreams in your heart when you're young and brings them to pass. But yeah, I love pouring into my students and giving them kind of an inside look into my life as a sports agent and as an attorney that deals with issues that they're hearing about on the news and they're reading about on Twitter. And I'm also, obviously, at Oklahoma Christian, I'm getting to also share those with a Christian worldview. So we have some great conversations about the things that we see happening in the sports world.
All right, and I got to ask you, if you've seen the movie Jerry Maguire, how close to real life was Jerry Maguire as a sports agent in that movie?
What's interesting, that movie came out while I was in law school, and I remember a lot of my classmates in law school immediately deciding they wanted to be Jerry Maguire. They wanted to show me the money, and they wanted to go do that. And I don't remember being inspired by that movie to go become a sports agent. That just is not a world that I saw myself in. And it's so ironic that that's exactly where I am now. And it's funny, I have a hard time watching that movie because even though it's sensational and it's not necessarily true to life, there are elements of that movie that are so familiar to me now. I talk about getting Bob Sugared all the time, where you lose out to someone that's trying to undermine you, and it happens so frequently in this business. And so a lot of it makes that movie really, really hard to watch. But the element that I love is the relationship that they end up developing, that Jerry ends up developing with his clients and the family, and how you hurt when they hurt, and how you cry with them and you laugh with them and you fight for them. And in that aspect, oh goodness, I love what I do. And I'm so thankful that God called me to a career that I wouldn't have chosen for myself.
Now, Kelli, I got to ask you to let the listener know all the various ways they can keep up with you, because you have a lot of different avenues besides Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Yeah. There are many ways. So if you don't mind, let the listener know how they can follow Kelli Masters.
You bet. Well, as you mentioned, I'm on Twitter all the time. That kind of seems to be the place for sports news and sports business, where everything happens, at least right now. Something else I'm sure will replace it. But on Twitter, I am at KMM Sports. On Instagram, I am at Kelli Masters, Kelli Masters, and we just launched KMM Sports on Instagram as well. So you can find both me individually and KMM Sports on Instagram. And then my website for speaking and teaching and other resources is just KelliMasters.com.
And if somebody wants to get an inspired speaker, we gave them a taste of that on this podcast, but I know that you're much sought after to speak on a lot of topics. Now, do you have a book out, or will there be one coming out?
Coming out. It's in the works right now. My first manuscript deadline was September 15th, so that just got turned in. I've got the rest of the manuscript is due in a couple of months, and we're looking at a launch actually Super Bowl week of 2021, which sounds like a long time away, but it's going to be here before we know it. So, look for my book. It'll be coming out in early 2021.
Very good. Well, Kelli, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to visiting with you again down the road, and maybe we'll do a refresh on the podcast in a year or so.
Would love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this podcast featuring Kelli Masters. Please don't forget to download other episodes of Suit Up, and please give us a 5-star rating.